Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
The first story is titled Wearing Combat Boots During Nursing School. Back when I was in nursing school, we were supposed to wear black, non-porous, closed-toed footwear with non-skid soles for our clinical rotations that weren't Crocs. Most of my fellow female students wore classic nursing clogs like Dascos and Sanitas. I tried wearing clogs like this in the past and had rolled my ankles too many times to recall, so I decided to not go that route for shoes. I'm a military spouse, a vet myself, and have aforementioned shitty ankles, so my footwear of choice was a pair of black leather tactical combat boots. As a show of support, and to make sure I always looked sharp at clinical, my hubby always shined up and edge-dressed my boots every evening before clinical the next morning. The boots always looked professional, they were comfy as hell, I could bump my toes into beds without breaking a toe, and I could wear them all day without having back pain, foot pain, or rolling an ankle. The same could not be said for my classmates wearing more traditional shoes like clogs. During the first week of my first semester, I had an old school nurse as my clinical instructor. I say old school because she believed female nurses should still be wearing crisp white uniforms with the stupid starched hats and that our profession lost prestige when we transitioned to scrubs. This instructor got such a bee in her bonnet about my boots and decided that my boots were out of regulation that she threatened to take it up to the director and have me tossed from clinical, thus failing the program. There was nothing in the handbook specifically stating I couldn't wear my boots since it just stated footwear, which was black, well-maintained, non-skid and non-porous. Check, 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 check. Furthermore, the pair of boots that I wore were meant to be worn by EMTs, so they were waterproof, blood-borne pathogen-resistant, puncture-proof, oil-proof, non-skid, and had reinforced toes. They were just as expensive as Dansko clogs, and could handle lots more abuse. I knew I was in the clear, and so I decided to keep on wearing them. The day after the instructor commented on the inappropriateness of my boots, she did a uniform shoe inspection to make sure we were appropriately attired. I, of course, was wearing my nicely polished combat boots. She failed me for the day based on my boots, so I politely objected, stating that my boots fell within the definitions of acceptable footwear in the handbook. She literally marched me to the director's office like I was kid caught stealing cookies and demanded I get tossed for the boots, failure to follow program rules, and disrespect because I objected to her failing me. The program director, upon further close reading of the program regs, determined there was nothing that was wrong with the boots, they adhered to the standards set forth by the program, and that they were honestly safer than most of the shoes the other students were wearing because they were waterproof, puncture-proof, non-skid and had reinforced toes. She rescinded my fail and allowed me back in clinical. After that, I heard not a peep about my boots from any of the faculty the rest of my program. Fast forward to graduation. I had been wearing combat boots since I started and had no intention of stopping, especially since many of the vets that I cared for during clinical always reacted positively to them. Our nursing pinning ceremony, the event where we receive our nursing school pins and are officially recognized as nurses, has an all-white dress code. White uniforms, starched white hats, white closed-toed footwear. The word footwear is key. The dress code did not state shoes specifically, and I knew this. Same bitchy old bat nurse sees me in the hall and makes it a point to tell me I'll have to get some real white nursing shoes to wear to pinning since I can't obviously wear my black combat boots because we needed to have white footwear. I politely smiled, nodded, said that I'd have white footwear, and went on my merry way. And then wore the all-white Doc Marten combat boots my infantryman husband bought me as a graduation gift to pinning. The instructor stopped me after the ceremony and complimented me on actually getting nursing shoes. At which point I pulled up the leg of my white scrubs and showed her my boots. The look on her face was priceless. The next story is titled, Cover Yourself Please, I am a very well-endowed woman. I have been since I was 13 and as I get older they get bigger. My father has always had a hard time with that, even though my mother is who I inherited it from. Any time I show a hint of cleavage he gets uncomfortable. Or he did. A few years ago I briefly moved back in with my parents to prepare to move out of state when my apartment complex was sold and renovated and rent went from $1,000 per month to $2,000 per month. I was 33 at the time, and I was wearing something that showed cleavage. He wasn't rude, but he made a comment and huffed about it, cause we were all going out to eat. So I said okay, I'll change, be right back. Now any woman with large breasts knows that certain clothes and certain materials and cuts will emphasize those, and it's not always just cleavage shirts that make them stick out. I had this maroon turtleneck, it was that bodycon material. Went from neck to hip, neck to fingertips. No skin exposed. So I put it on and came back to the kitchen. The look on my father's face was priceless. He couldn't bitch about cleavage showing, but this shirt hugged my breasts, and made them look even bigger than they did before. I was like, so you think this is better, huh? Needless to say, my father never commented on my cleavage showing ever again. The next story is titled, Bad Orders Are Still Orders. Bad orders that don't get you or others killed or in trouble are for ripe malicious compliance. During basic training for the Air Force, we had a temporary assistant TI, never call them the junior TI. We were going somewhere one day and we had just started marching out of our squadron. We came up on the exit, and instead of ordering us to turn left, he called out column right. So we turned right, which had us marching directly into a wall, where we stacked up like old comedy movie, marching in place. The TI screamed at us, "What are you doing?" pointing at a random member of the flight. Name: "Why did you do this?" "Sir." "You called column right." "Sir." "No, I didn't." And continued to yell at us. At no point did he tell us to stop, break formation and reform, pointing the way we had been going. So there we are marching in place, getting yelled at. Finally a senior TI from another flight comes up, tells our TI to stop yelling. Takes command of us. "Halt, break, reform over there. And wait." He and the assistant TI walk away. That was the last we saw of that TI. Eventually another TI came up to us, asked where we were going and took command and got us there. Over dinner we found out there 2 other flights behind us, several TIs and the squadron's senior NCO. The reason we were left for 5 minutes getting yelled at was because the TIs were all laughing too hard to properly fix the situation. The only reference our senior TI made to the event was to point to one of the members of the flight. If I ever give a bone-headed marching command, you have permission to speak up with a big loud, "Sir? Sir. Yes. Sir." The next story is titled, No Shirtless Posters? Okay, fine. So, like most kids, my childhood bedroom walls were decorated with posters, celebrity pictures, my own photo collages, etc. My older brother's room had posters up too, but his were mostly of hot women, you get the idea. My dad had a collection of bikini calendars too, which he had hanging in his workspaces. The same ones were always displayed for as long as I could remember. Basically, sexy bikini posters were never unusual around our house. When I became a teenager, I started following in my brother's footsteps with my own sexy posters. I started to rip pictures of shirtless hunks out of my monthly 17 magazines and pin them up. Pretty soon, the rules in our house started to change. One day, my dad said that I needed to take down all of the pictures of men in my room because they were inappropriate. I pointed out that my brother was allowed to have photos of topless women, so that was unfair. Dad reluctantly agreed, and declared a new rule that no one could have topless photos anymore. Cue my brother clearing his walls obediently, but I wasn't giving up that easily. I got some colored paper, traced over each and every one of my many posters, and created a fitted t-shirt to stick over every topless dude in my room. The look on my dad's face when he came in to see all the well-clothed posters was priceless. With this alteration, my posters were all allowed to stay up. This went on for a little while, but eventually my mum pointed out that while this nonsense was all very amusing, Dad still had his own calendars around the house that brother could easily go look at if he wanted to, so it was actually still unfair for me. She asked if my dad was planning to get rid of his photos too with this new rule. By this point, my dad was exhausted with the ongoing poster debate and irritated with how his own rule had turned on him. He gave up the fight and stopped censoring what I put on my walls after that. The next story is titled, Not Sure If Malicious Enough, but My Telemarketer Story. For years after high school I got calls from the extended warranty marketers. First on my Hyundai Accent until I scrapped it. Then on my dad's Honda Insight. Later on my Volvo S70 and my Hyundai Elantra. So one day I finally started to comply. Marketer: Hello sir. This is about your offer to extend the warranty on your car. Me, yes sir, please proceed. Marketer, what is the make and model of your vehicle? Me, Hyundai Elantra. Marketer, what year? Me, 2004. Marketer, how many miles on the vehicle? Me, 255,000 or so. Marketer, hangs up. Been 5 years since they called me and haven't heard from them since. Not sure why he hung up. The next story is titled, Take Care of Every Single Patient, No Matter How Long It Takes. Backstory, I got hired for an IV pharmacy tech position back in January of last year. It started off pretty nice, well-rounded team to help get me up to speed, pharmacists were lovely, and the general manager, GM equals my boss, were nothing but good to me at the time. My basic job description was to fill IVs for patients to leave on delivery runs, clean IV pumps, compound medications, check out of dates, and clean the IV room. Our team had to make sure the IV medications were leaving on time for deliveries, which were 2 at the time, 1 for the afternoon, and 1 for late night. My GM's motto was to always put the patient first, no matter the circumstances. This comes into play later on. During the months I was working there, the IV lead tech, let's call her Emily, had fully trained me and placed me on early morning shifts, Monday to Friday at 3:30 am, which turned out to be one of the most relaxed shifts I've ever worked in my life. Basically I would fill a few IV medications for patients during the time frame before Emily would come in at 8 am, and I'd leave at 12 p.m, therefore having the rest of the day to myself. Emily and I started to click very well and had a great workflow in place for the other members to come in for the evenings. May comes along, and our IV team, which was 4 people including myself, started to disband one by one within a 2-week spread. Emily informed me that she was also putting in her notice shortly after the first member did, within 2 days of one another, so it got pretty scary at first. Our GM called me personally into his office, and offered me the lead IV tech role. What went off in my head at that time was, really? Me? 3 months in, and being offered a lead spot? I was overwhelmed with joy and got a significant raise to go along with it once I accepted the offer. During Emily's 2 weeks' notice, she showed and taught me everything she knew about her role, and the major keys, points on what the bosses are looking for, etc. The day after Emily left, I was in charge. However, the minor setback, it was only a team of 2 people now. Knowing that my cushy 4 am shift was eliminated, the remaining team member, let's call her Diane, and I talked about a schedule and worked it out perfectly. Diane volunteered to work Saturday to Wednesday, all 8-hour shifts, and I would work Monday to Friday. The major difference was that Thursday to Friday were 9 a 8 p shifts, with nobody to cover for the entire day. The GM and I had a discussion about this, and said he would personally find 2 more people to replace the ones who left, and get things back to normal. May to July was one of the worst times I've ever worked in my life. Instead of working 9 to 8 on Thursday, Friday, I was working 9 a 11 p, so about 12 to 13-hour shifts on both of those days. Surprisingly, during this entire ordeal, Diane and I worked very well together, and able to send out all of the IVs that were ordered on time without missing any. Keep in mind, since day one of working here, we never had an IV that went out late for deliveries, nor missed any patients. Around mid-July, I got fed up with waiting for my GM to hire 2 new people for my team. I finally went into his office, explained the situation and my reasoning of frustration, only to be told that it was my responsibility to look for new team members, when he said that he'd personally look for me. I was completely dumbfounded by this, and it finally set into me that this place wasn't the place I expected it to be. You know, like one of those, very nice and reasonable at first, then turns into straight hell after a few months? Yeah, it keeps getting worse from here. I talked to Diane about it, and she explained to me that this was the reason why Emily left the company. Uh-oh. Middle of August comes around, and we finally hired 2 more people to my team, and they were amazing. Once all trained, come September, things were starting to get back to normal. I was back to 40-hour weeks, Diane and myself finally got some quality of life again. Win-win, right? Nope. Early September, GM called me back into his office and did not like the fact I was working 48-hour weeks before our staff went back to normal. The GM said, "Kofaze, my payroll was almost in the negative during those months thanks to you. We can't have you working overtime like that anymore." I explained that it was only 2 of us working, 2 people down, the IVs were still getting out on time, we put the patient first, just like you said. I also asked why he didn't tell me this while we were short-staffed at the time, that this could have been easily avoided and would have completely understood the situation. GM scoffed and made a snarky remark, "Well, you're a lead, so I shouldn't have to tell you to not work overtime. How about you use your time more wisely?" What the fuck? I was just making sure every patient was taken care of, no matter the circumstances, and following his command. This is also the first time he has ever mentioned payroll and overtime to me, so I was generally upset about all of it. After this, I did not work any more OT. November came around, and oh boy, it couldn't have been any worse. I had to let go one of my members due to excessive no-show, no-call, and Diane was finally putting in her notice because she was getting her dream job across the country. Note that this again happened within a 2-week span. I was a little sad on the inside, but also couldn't have been happier that Diane was following her dream. Back to a 2-person crew again, uh-oh. During this period, I was very lucky that the newest IV tech, let's call her Jasmine, agreed to working the same shift as Diane's for the time being, and told her that things would go back to normal soon. It was sneaking up on flu and the cold season, and it gets much busier in the healthcare world around that time. I was still working 40 hours a week, yet I am still by myself on 2 fry, just like a few months ago when I worked 11-hour shifts. One day, GM randomly called me into his office, and snarled, "Coface, IV medications weren't made for a run, please explain why." I told him that you specifically told me to not work any overtime like back in the day because it hurt your payroll, so I was just following your orders and trying to use my time wisely. I could tell he was extremely furious and just told me to go back to work. He sent me an email specifically stating the following, "Coface, the patient always comes first. I do not care how long it takes you, but I want every single IV patient taken care of before you leave work. This is where you need to step up and be a leader." I showed this to Jasmine, and her jaw dropped so far that you could walk over it, and couldn't believe that he would say that to me via email. Malicious compliance time. Every day after he sent me the email, I made sure that every single IV patient was taken care of, therefore working about 12 to 14 hours shifts 5 days a week. During this madness, many of the pharmacists and other staff were concerned about my health, but I specifically told them the same words that GM spewed out at me. The better part about it all, it was the start of a new pay period, which lasts 2 weeks long. I think you know where I'm headed with this. While all of that was going on, I have already applied to another job, and was waiting on the thumbs up when to start. About 3 weeks go by and guess who calls me? The GM asked to see me in his office immediately. I could tell by the look on his face of what he was going to tell me. He was holding my pay stub, saying that his payroll was completely shot, that he now has to cut hours of other workers to meet it for the monthly quota, and why I would work 132 hours in a 2-week span, knowing it would hurt his payroll. I had the biggest grin on my face when I showed him the email and used his own words against him. "Sir, you told me to make sure every single patient was taken care of before I left work, so I specifically followed your orders." The GM's face turned beet red with anger, knowing that there was nothing he could do about this because it would come back on him due to a paper trail with specifics. After this conversation, to put a cherry on a cake, I also put in my 2-week notice and told him that I have taken an offer with another company. The next day, Jasmine also put in her notice because she was completely unhappy with this entire situation, therefore having 0 people left in the department. Months have gone by, and I love it here at my new line of work. I spoke with an ex-coworker a couple of weeks ago, and told me that the IV department has still not recovered since my departure. They have consistent trouble keeping more than 2 people, and have had to utilize other locations to help with deliveries due to severe understaffing, costing them thousands of dollars in the process. The next story is titled, "Squad Sits in the Forest for an Hour and a Half Waiting to Ambush an Enemy Squad That Never Comes." Army ROTC story. So in Army ROTC, we do these labs where we simulate combat other scenarios for training purposes. On this given day, we are practicing react to contact, and my group gets assigned to be the OPFOR enemy for this given rotation. My group is a team-sized element with 5 males including myself. A college senior tells us where to sit in the forest, and we prepare to fake ambush the incoming squad. It's drizzling rain, and after we set up our position, everyone starts digging into our MREs and waiting. The problem is that the squad we were supposed to ambush never came. I urged everyone to keep waiting in the forest because sometimes the squad the Pat's setting up takes a lot of time, but eventually, it became clear that nobody was coming. At this point, I realized that we had something good going for us. You see, these labs are mandatory training, and as contracted cadets get paid by the month, as well as tuition. So I just told everyone in the group to stay put as it was the last order we received. My ulterior motive was to get some rest time and finish our MREs all while getting paid and following orders. Everyone else wanted to sit and wait too. Mind you, I was not the group leader, so everything I said was just a suggestion. We sit and wait for the next hour. This gave all of us enough time to finish our MREs without having to rush. They don't give you free time on these days to eat. Then, we pick up from our position to find the college senior that placed us there. Eventually, we find him, and it takes him less than a second before his face is bright red with embarrassment. You see, since he was in charge of placing us and forgot that we were there, he could get a slap on the wrist for forgetting about us and leaving us there. "Oh my God, guys," he says in a hushed tone. "Don't tell anyone about this and I'll owe you one. In fact, drinks are on me after this lab." I don't drink, so I couldn't tell you if he followed through on that promise, but he was definitely grateful we didn't mention it to Kadra. The next story is titled, "I'm the healer, you're a DPS, stop doing my job." Okay, now this will begin with a bit of terminology. I play Final Fantasy XIV FFXIV, which is a multiplayer video game. In FFXIV, there are 3 types of classes: tank, who leads the way and makes sure enemies don't attack anyone else; healer, who heals damage and resurrects dead players; and DPS, who deals the majority of the damage. Dungeons are ran with a tank, a healer and 2 DPS, usually randomly assembled from people who queue up for the dungeon. The Class 1 player is Red Mage, who, importantly to this story, is unique among DPS classes in the sense it can do a pretty decent healing output and very easily resurrect others, something even healers can't do. Without going to details, healers can only resurrect instantly once a minute, Red Mages can do it every 5 seconds. Dungeons have 3 bosses, each harder than the last. So this happened yesterday, when I got into a dungeon, Kitana Revel for the knowledgeable, with a scholar as a healer. Note, Kitana is a pretty high-level dungeon, definitely not for beginners. Red flags went off immediately, because for some reason Kitana tends to attract questionable scholars in my experience. Note that the scholar wasn't new to this dungeon. We go through the first boss with relative ease, but in the second boss the scholar is struggling to heal the incoming damage, and then dies when a pillar falls on them. I casually resurrect them and heal the tank while they're resurrecting. They got mad, but didn't tell. Then later on the tank gets bold and collects more enemies than they can chew, and the healer is doing kind of subpar healing, so I again pitch in with my healing spell. The third and final boss comes, and those who already ran it know that the final boss of Kitana is especially tough because of the sheer amount of unavoidable, and much more avoidable, damage. We start and I can already see the scholar isn't using their abilities effectively to mitigate and heal damage with the exact spell needed for the situation. They also aren't running away when an enemy ability requires them to run away. I tell them that's what the ability requires, and they don't answer. Nor run away when the boss uses the ability on them again. This goes on for a bit, then the tank dies. I casually resurrect them and then heal them up. Healer dies shortly after, I resurrect them too. We eventually wipe when I die and the healer starts casting a long resurrection spell. They use their once-a-minute resurrect instantly ability on the tank on me, gets interrupted by damage, and dies to an avoidable boss ability, then tank and other DPS die. We have to go back to the boss and start it from the beginning since everyone died. This is called a wipe, and while legging it there, scholar goes off on me. Paraphrased, I wasted swift cast on the tank. Stop doing my job. I'm the healer, you're a DPS, stop doing my job. I literally saved us a good couple times, but sure buddy. I reply with an okay. Boss time. Right off the bat, we get severely damaged by unavoidable damage and healer isn't using their correct abilities. I just mind my business and DPS. Then healer dies, ironically, because they still weren't running away from that one boss ability. Tank eyes me expectantly. I cast another Verthunder, a DPS spell. Tank is trying their best to keep themselves alive, but tanks are not healers, nor red mages, and eventually they go down. The boss targets the other DPS next and hits them heavy. If only I had a healing spell. They go down, and since I'm refusing to heal even myself, I die. That's a wipe, folks. As we are all going back to the boss, Tank asks me why I didn't resurrect the healer, or them. I reply, Scholar asked me to do my job and DPS. Tank responds with opening a vote to kick the Scholar from the group. The vote passes with flying colors. A couple minutes later, we get another healer, a white mage this time, and we finish the final boss without any further issues. The next story is titled, You Want Milk? I'll Get You Milk. This happened a long time ago, but it is burned into my memory. I will never forget it. Sometimes I feel that if you're going to be a waitress or waiter, you have to go off on at least one customer one time just to be able to keep your sanity about everything. I worked at a fairly fast-paced restaurant, very common through the Midwest and Southern states. We are very popular for breakfast and brunch. Sundays after church are a busy time. There were 2 of us scheduled from 11 a.m. until 7 p.m. Almost every week both of the swings would be cut when the dinner shift came on. This particular day they kept both of us because one person called in sick and we were uncannily busy for a Sunday night. It was a very unique evening. Everything went so smoothly despite being on a wait list. Then I had them. A group of 3 30-ish men carrying their Bibles. When I took the drink order, one of them said he would like coffee with a little cup of cream. No problem, I think to myself. We have those individually packaged creamers, so I brought that to the table with his coffee. Short while later I was carrying the food to my 5-top and he reached out and touched me trying to get my attention as I was passing carrying the tray. I told him I would be right there. After I delivered the dinners to my 5-top I stopped back at his table. He was agitated and said, This is the 3rd time I have asked you, I need a cup of milk for my coffee. I was a little bit pissed at his attitude, and a little bit pissed because I did not screw up. I replied, No, actually this is only the 2nd time that you have asked me. The 1st time you asked for a cup of cream. And I brought cream. You want milk? I'll get you milk. I went back and I got a little pitcher and I put milk in it. I came back and slammed it on the table in front of him so hard that half the milk shot straight up out of the pitcher and splattered all over the table. Felt good. And yes, I wiped it up, with a simple oops. The other 2 guys were obviously embarrassed at his behavior and of course they were the only ones that left a tip. Lol. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel and post some bear emojis in the comment.